The Valorix mining station floated in the cold silence of space. Anchored to asteroid KR7, like a metal parasite feeding on rock and ore, it was not a beautiful place. It was a place of work, of sweat, of creatures from dozens of worlds who came to dig and drill and haul cargo for wages that barely kept them alive. The station groaned and creaked with every shift of the asteroid beneath it, and the workers had long ago learned to ignore the sounds of metal bending and settling on this day. The station held more than just miners and haulers. 12 elite younglings had come aboard with their teacher, a fragile elder named Sorvith, who glowed with soft blue light beneath her translucent skin. The Aleth were a peaceful species, known across the galaxy for their gentle nature and their beautiful bioluminescence that pulsed with their emotions. Their children were even more delicate, their bodies not yet hardened by age, their light soft and flickering like candles in a dark room. Sorvith had brought them to learn about the mining operations, to see how other species worked and lived among the stars. The younglings pressed their small faces against viewing windows and asked endless questions about the machines and the rocks and the strange creatures who operated them. They were in the medical bay when everything went wrong. A cargo hauler named the Brevnik had been attempting to dock at the central hub, carrying 300 tons of refined minerals bound for the inner colonies. The pilot was tired, having worked a double shift, and his hands were slow on the controls. He misjudged the approach angle by just 2 degrees. 2 degrees was enough. The Brevnik struck the docking clamps at an angle that should have been survivable, but the clamps had not been properly maintained in years. Metal that should have held instead shattered, and the hauler continued forward, crashing through the outer wall of the central hub with a sound like thunder. The impact sent shockwaves through the entire station in the medical bay 3 decks below. Sorvith felt the floor shake beneath her feet and grabbed the nearest youngling as alarms began to scream. Then the ceiling came down. The structural supports of the upper decks had been weakened by the collision, and they gave way in a cascade of failing metal and collapsing platforms. Thousands of kilograms of twisted alloy and broken machinery fell through the station like an avalanche, tearing through deck after deck until it crashed into the medical bay with terrible force. Sorvith threw herself over as many younglings as she could reach. But she was small, and they were many. When the dust settled and the screaming of torn metal finally stopped, she found herself trapped in a nightmare. The medical bay had become a tomb of wreckage. Massive beams of reinforced alloy lay across the room like the bones of some dead giant, pinning equipment and debris in a tangled maze. Sorvith pulled herself free from a pile of rubble and immediately began searching for her students. She found them huddled together in the far corner of the room, protected by a fallen cabinet that had created a small pocket of space. All 12 were alive, but they were trapped. A massive support beam, thick as a ground transport and twice as long, had fallen across the only exit, and more debris was piled on top of it like a barricade built by cruel hands. The younglings were crying, their bioluminescence flashing in patterns of fear and distress that made Sorvith's heart ache. Tried to move the smaller pieces of debris, but her arms were weak and her body was meant for thinking. Not lifting, the Aleth had evolved on a world of gentle gravity and warm seas, and their muscles were soft compared to the species who came from harsher places. She could not move even the smallest beam. Then she noticed the air. It tasted wrong, thin and sharp, and she realized with horror that the life support systems had been damaged and the collapsed oxygen was leaking out through cracks in the walls, and the emergency seals had failed to deploy. She checked the environmental readout on her personal device and felt her light dim with despair. They had maybe 15 minutes of breathable air remaining. Sorv did the only thing she could do. She activated her emergency beacon and broadcast a distress signal on all frequencies, describing their location, the number of trapped younglings, and the failing oxygen supply. Then she gathered her students close and told them to breathe slowly, to stay calm, to save their air help would come. She promised them help always came across the station. Alarms were blaring and emergency crews were mobilizing. But the damage was severe, and resources were stretched thin. The Valorix mining station had never been designed for disasters of this scale, and a handful of emergency responders were overwhelmed by dozens of distress calls coming from every section. Then the Viscari arrived. The Galactic Union had received the distress signal and dispatched their nearest rapid response team, a crew of elite Viscari rescue specialists who had been conducting training exercises in a neighboring system. The Viscari were insectoid beings with hard exoskeletons and compound eyes that could see in nearly every spectrum of light. They were known throughout 12 star systems as the finest rescue operators in the Union, capable of extracting survivors from situations that would defeat any other species. Commander Thrix led the team, a veteran of over 200 successful missions who had pulled living beings from collapsed buildings, crashed ships, and burning stations across the galaxy. He had seen terrible things and saved countless lives, and he approached every mission with cold efficiency and absolute confidence. His team landed their shuttle in the station's emergency bay and immediately began assessing the situation. They split into groups, each heading toward different distress signals, prioritizing based on the number of trapped individuals and the severity of their condition. Trix himself took a team of 4 toward the medical bay, where the signal indicated 12 Alith younglings with failing life support. He expected a difficult extraction, perhaps requiring plasma cutters and hydraulic lifters, but nothing his team could not handle. He was wrong. When Thrix and his team reached the medical bay, they found a scene of devastation beyond anything they had prepared for. The collapsed wreckage formed a mountain of twisted metal, and at the center of it all was the massive support beam that trapped the youngling. Shrix's compound eyes analyzed the beam, calculating its weight, its density, the amount of force that would be required to move it. The numbers were impossible. The beam weighed over 4,000 standard units, far beyond the capacity of their portable equipment. Their plasma cutters could slice through the metal, but that would take 40 minutes at minimum. And the younglings had less than 15 minutes of air. Thrix felt something he had not felt in many years. He felt helpless. He turned to relay the grim mathematics to his team, to begin the futile work of cutting through metal that they could not cut fast enough. When he noticed a figure standing at the edge of the debris field, it was a human. The creature was tall and broad, with skin the color of copper and short dark hair covered in dust, and ash blood ran from a gash on his forehead, and his woolen jumpsuit was torn in several places. He was staring at the wreckage with an expression that Thrix did not recognize, something burning and desperate in his strange flat eyes. The human's name was Marcus Cole, and he was about to do something impossible. Marcus Cole had worked on the Valorix mining station for 3 years, hauling cargo and loading freight in the endless cycle of ships that came and went like metal birds migrating through the void. He was not special by any measure that the galaxy would recognize. He had no advanced degrees, no military training, no genetic modifications or cybernetic enhancements. He was simply a man who had fled Earth and its memories to find quiet labor among the stars. 7 years ago, on a moon called Europa, his daughter had died. Her name was Elena, and she had been 9 years old, with hair like spun gold and a laugh that could fill any room with warmth. She had gone with her school group to tour a mining facility, the same kind of educational trip that happened on colonies across human space every single day. The facility had suffered a structural collapse, and Elena had been trapped beneath the rubble with 11 other children. Marcus had been working on a transport ship in orbit when he received the news, and by the time he reached the surface, it was too late. The rescue crews had done everything they could. But the weight of the debris had been too great, and the oxygen had run out too quickly. He had arrived just in time to see them pull her small body from the wreckage. Her golden hair gray with dust and her eyes closed forever. Something broke inside Marcus Cole that day. Something that had never healed and never would. He left Earth, left human space entirely, and drifted from station to station, taking whatever work he could find, trying to outrun a grief that followed him like a shadow. But grief cannot be outrun, and memories cannot be erased. And every night he still dreamed of his daughter's face and the rescue. That came too late now. He stood in a ruined medical bay watching an alien commander calculate the same impossible mathematics that had killed his Elena 12 children trapped beneath wreckage too heavy to move, with air running out and time slipping away like sand through desperate fingers. History was about to repeat itself, and Marcus Cole felt something stir in the deepest parts of his soul. Commander Thrix turned to address his team, his clicking mandibles forming words in the galactic standard, tongue that all species understood. "The beam cannot be moved with our equipment," he said, his voice flat and emotionless in the way of Vescari, who faced impossible odds. "We will begin cutting procedures, but mathematical projections indicate we will not complete extraction before the oxygen supply is exhausted." One of the younger Vescari made a sound of distress, but Thrix silenced him with a gesture. "We will document our efforts for the official record and provide comfort to the trapped individuals during their final moments. As protocol requires." Marcus heard these words, and something inside him snapped, not broke, not shattered, but snapped like a chain being pulled too tight, releasing something that had been locked away for 7 long years. He walked forward, pushing past the Vescari rescue team, his boots crunching on broken glass and twisted metal. Thrix turned his compound eyes toward the human with a mixture of confusion and irritation. "Civilian, you must clear this area immediately," the commander said. "This is an active rescue operation, and your presence is not authorized." Marcus did not respond. He kept walking until he stood directly beneath the massive support beam, looking up at the tons of metal that separated 12 alien children from survival behind the beam. He could see their lights flickering through gaps in the debris, soft pulses of blue and green that reminded him of fireflies on summer nights back on Earth. He could hear them crying, their voices high and musical. Even in their fear, one of them called out to him through the rubble. "Please help us," the small voice said, translated by the station systems into words he could understand. "We are very scared and the air tastes bad." Marcus closed his eyes and saw Elena's face, heard her voice asking him the same question in his dreams every night for 7 years. "Please help us, Daddy, please." He opened his eyes and looked at the beam above him. The Vescari said it weighed over 4,000 standard units, which translated to roughly 8,000 pounds. In the measurements, Marcus had grown up with 8,000 pounds of metal and machinery. Impossible for any living creature to lift without mechanical assistance. But Marcus Cole was not thinking about what was possible. He was thinking about 12 children who would die if he did nothing. 12 families who would receive the same terrible news he had received 7 years ago. 12 small bodies that would be pulled from the rubble while their parents screamed in grief. Was thinking about all the nights he had lain awake wondering if he could have done something different, if he could have gotten there faster, if he could have somehow saved his daughter, if only he had been there when she needed him. He was thinking about Second Chance. Thrix watched in bewilderment as the human positioned himself beneath the beam, planting his feet wide apart and reaching up to grip the jagged metal with both hands. "What are you doing?" the commander demanded. "That beam cannot be lifted by biological means. You will only injure yourself and complicate our rescue efforts." Marcus looked at the alien commander with eyes that had gone strangely calm, like the surface of a deep lake before a storm. "Then stand back," he said, "because I am going to lift it anyway." Thrix made a sound that might have been laughter in his species. A clicking rattle of disbelief. "Human, I have calculated the weight precisely, and I have extensive data on your species' physical capabilities," he said. "The maximum recorded lift for an unaugmented human is approximately 500 standard units under optimal conditions. And you are injured and fatigued and working in a compromised environment." He gestured with one of his forearms toward the beam above Marcus's head. "That beam weighs more than 8 times your species. Maximum capacity, and it is pinned beneath additional debris that adds further resistance," he continued. "What you are attempting is not merely difficult. It is mathematically impossible." Marcus tightened his grip on the metal until his knuckles turned white and his arms began to tremble with the strain. "I was not asking for your mathematics," he said through gritted teeth. "I was telling you to stand back." Then he began to push. At first nothing happened, and Thrix felt a moment of grim satisfaction at being proven correct. But then he noticed something strange happening to the human's body. The muscles in Marcus's arms and shoulders began to swell and harden. Cords of tissue standing out beneath his skin like cables being pulled tight. His face contorted into an expression of absolute determination. Veins rising on his forehead and neck like rivers of blood seeking the surface. A sound began to build in his chest. Something low and primal that resonated through the ruined medical bay like the growl of some ancient predator. The beam groaned. Thrix's compound eyes widened as his sensors detected movement. Actual physical movement in the structure above the human's straining body. Metal that should not move was moving, rising millimeter by millimeter as Marcus Cole poured every ounce of strength in his body into the impossible task. The commander felt something he had not experienced since he was a larva. Something that his species had evolved beyond millions of years ago. He felt fear, and he could not move. The human body is a remarkable machine, built by millions of years of evolution on one of the most dangerous worlds in the known galaxy, Earth. The humans called their homeworld, and they spoke of it with love and nostalgia as if they did not realize the truth of the place they came from to the rest of the galaxy. Earth was a death world, was a planet of extreme temperatures and violent weather, of predators with sharp teeth and poisonous creatures that could kill with a single touch. The gravity was crushing compared to the gentle worlds, where most intelligent species had evolved, and the atmosphere was thick with oxygen that fed fires and fed the endless hunger of Earth's competitive life forms. Humans had survived all of this, and the survival had shaped them into something the galaxy did not fully understand. Their bodies carried secrets, hidden capabilities that emerged only in moments of desperate need. Scientists called it the fight or flight response, a chemical cascade that flooded the human system with hormones that increased strength, speed, and endurance far beyond normal levels. But there was another level beyond this, something rarer and more terrifying. The humans called it hysterical strength. It happened when a human faced a situation so desperate, so utterly unacceptable, that their brains simply refused to acknowledge the limitations of their body. The chemical limiters that normally prevented humans from damaging themselves through overexertion were overridden, and for a brief window of time, the human body could perform feats that seemed to violate the laws of physics. Mothers had lifted vehicles off their trapped children. Soldiers had carried wounded comrades for miles through hostile territory. Despite injuries that should have left them immobile, athletes had shattered records and then collapsed as their bodies paid the price for the impossible demands placed upon them. This was the secret that Commander Thrix was witnessing, the terrible gift of the faith of the Death World species that stood before him, pushing against 8,000 pounds of twisted metal. Marcus Cole's body had entered a state that evolution had designed for moments exactly Like this one, his adrenal glands were pumping massive quantities of adrenaline into his bloodstream, and his brain was releasing endorphins that blocked the pain signals. Screaming from his muscles and joints, his heart was pounding at nearly 200 beats per minute, flooding his tissues with oxygen-rich blood that his muscles burned through like fuel in a furnace. The biological safety switches that should have prevented him from tearing his own body apart had been disabled by the overwhelming need to save the children trapped behind the wreckage. Was no longer operating within the normal parameters of human capability. He was operating in the realm of what humans called the impossible. The beam rose slowly, centimeter by agonizing centimeter. The massive support structure lifted from its resting place as Marcus Cole drove upward with every fiber of his being. The floor beneath his feet cracked under the pressure, the metal plating buckling as he transferred the enormous weight through his body and into the ground below his spine, compressed with forces that would have shattered the bones of any other species in the galaxy. Blood vessels burst in his eyes, turning the whites into fields of crimson red. His shoulders screamed as tendons stretched to their absolute limits. And somewhere deep in his back he felt something tear with a wet pop that sent waves of agony through his nervous system. He did not stop. He could not stop behind the rising beam. The Aleth younglings watched with their huge luminous eyes as the human giant lifted the sky itself to set them free. Their bioluminescence shifted from the flickering patterns of fear to something else, something that pulsed in slow waves of wonder and disbelief. The smallest among them, a child named Velith, who had been crying the loudest, fell silent as she watched the impossible unfold before her. Commander Thrix stood frozen, his forearms hanging limp at his sides and his compound eyes fixed on the human in a state of absolute paralysis. His entire understanding of the universe was being rewritten in real time, and his mind could not process what he was seeing. The Veskari were a logical species, perhaps the most logical in the entire Galactic Union. They did not believe in miracles, or magic, or anything that could not be measured and calculated with precision. Their rescue operations were planned down to the smallest detail, and they succeeded because they never attempted anything that mathematics said was impossible. But mathematics was lying to him now. Or perhaps mathematics had simply never accounted for creatures like the one straining before him. The other members of Thrix's team were equally frozen, their bodies locked in place by an instinctive response to witnessing something that their evolution had taught them to fear on some deep level, buried beneath millions of years of civilized development. The Veskari remembered what it meant to be prey. They remembered the predators of their ancient homeworld, the terrible creatures that had hunted their ancestors through forests of crystal and stone. Those predators had been nothing compared to the being they were watching now. This human, this seemingly ordinary creature of flesh and blood, was displaying the kind of raw physical power that their species, associated with natural disasters and extinction events. He was not just lifting the beam, he was defying the fundamental laws of the universe through sheer force of will. And that defiance triggered every survival instinct the Veskari possess. Run. Their instincts screamed at them. Run and hide, and do not let this creature see you. But they could not run. They could only watch. Marcus felt his vision narrowing as his body began to fail under the impossible strain. The edges of his sight grew dark, and he knew that unconsciousness was coming for him like a tide that could not be held back forever. He had seconds left, maybe less. Get them out. He roared at the frozen Veskari, his voice barely human anymore, torn ragged by the strain of holding up the weight of a collapsed building. Get them out now. The shout broke through Thrix's paralysis like a hammer shattering ice. The commander's training took over. The thousands of hours of drilling and practice that allowed rescue specialists to function even in the most chaotic situations He barked orders at his team, and the Veskari finally moved, scuttling forward toward the gap that Marcus had created beneath the lifted beam. Space was barely wide enough for the slender Aleth bodies, but it was Nothrix himself reached into the gap and pulled the first youngling free, passing the glowing child to one of his team members before reaching back for another one by one. The Aleth children were extracted from their tomb of twisted metal. The teacher Sorvith came last, her frail body scraping against the jagged edges of the debris as she crawled toward freedom, with tears of relief streaming down her luminescent face through it all. Marcus held the beam. His body was a ruin of torn muscles and cracked bones. But he held the beam because the alternative was unthinkable. 93 seconds. The station's records would later show 93 seconds of holding over 8,000 pounds above his head, while 12 children crawled to safety beneath him when the last youngling was clear. When Thrix called out that everyone was free, Marcus Cole finally let go of the beam, crashed down with a thunderous roar that shook the entire deck, sending up clouds of dust and debris that obscured everything in a gray fog, and Marcus collapsed. His legs gave out first, then his arms. Then his entire body crumpled to the broken floor like a puppet whose strings had been cut. He did not feel the impact, did not feel anything at all. The darkness took him. And somewhere in that darkness, he thought he heard his daughter's voice telling him that she was proud. The medical team arrived 7 minutes after the last Aleth child was pulled from the wreckage, and what they found made even the most experienced among them pause in shock. Marcus Cole lay motionless on the broken floor, surrounded by dust and debris and the fading echoes of the impossible thing he had done. His body was a catalog of destruction, a medical textbook of injuries that should have killed him 10 times over. The emergency medics, a mixed team of Volani healers and human doctors from the station's clinic, worked frantically to stabilize him while the rescued Aleth younglings watched from a safe distance. Their bioluminescence pulsed in slow rhythms of distress and confusion, their young minds struggling to process what they had witnessed. The smallest child, Veleth, refused to be taken away by her teachers. She stood at the edge of the rescue area with her tiny hands clasped together, her large eyes fixed on the broken human who had saved her life. "Will the giant be okay?" she asked in her musical voice, the translator converting her words into flat galactic standard. "He lifted the whole sky for us." No one answered her, because no one knew the medical scans revealed damage that bordered on catastrophic. 13 separate fractures ran through Marcus's skeletal system, including 3 vertebrae that had cracked under the compression of the weight he had borne. 4 major muscle groups had torn completely, the tissue shredded by forces far beyond what it was designed to handle. 2 discs in his spine had ruptured, spilling their contents into the surrounding tissue and compressing the nerves that carried signals to his legs. Internal bleeding pooled in his abdominal cavity from organs that had been squeezed and battered by the strain. Both of his shoulders had partially dislocated, the joints pulled apart by the terrible demands he had placed on them. The blood vessels in his eyes had burst so thoroughly that his entire sclera had turned deep red, making him look like something from a nightmare. And yet somehow, impossibly, his heart was still beating. The human body, the medics would later write in their reports, had demonstrated a capacity for survival that exceeded all known parameters. Commander Thrix stood apart from the medical activity, his compound eyes watching the efforts to save the human with an expression that his species did not normally display. He was troubled, and he did not fully understand why in his long career as a rescue specialist, he had seen many acts of bravery and self-sacrifice, had watched beings of dozens of species risk their lives to save others, and he had always understood their actions within the framework of his logical worldview. Bravery was a calculated risk, a decision to accept personal danger in exchange for the greater good of saving lives. It was admirable and honorable. But it was also understandable what Marcus Cole had done was not understandable. The human had not calculated risks or weighed probabilities. He had not considered the mathematical certainty of his own destruction. He had simply seen children in danger and decided that he would save them, regardless of what physics or biology or common sense said was possible. And then he had made the impossible possible through nothing but raw determination and a willingness to destroy himself in the process. Thrix had a word for this in his native language, a term from ancient Viscari mythology that his people had long ago dismissed as superstition and fantasy. The word translated roughly to the madness of gods, and it referred to the legendary state in which mortal beings transcended their physical limitations through divine intervention. The Viscari had stopped believing in such things thousands of years ago, but watching the medics work on Marcus Cole's shattered body, Thrix found himself wondering if perhaps his ancestors had known something that modern science had forgotten. The Aleth teacher, Sorvith, approached him with hesitant steps, her bioluminescence dim with exhaustion and emotional turmoil. "Commander," she said softly, "I must know who that human is. I must know his name so that I can tell my students who saved them." Thrix accessed the station's personnel database with a quick query through his neural implant. "His name is Marcus Cole," he replied. "He is a freight worker assigned to cargo handling in the central hub, and he has no special training or abilities listed in his file." Sorvith made a sound that was half laugh and half sob. "No special abilities," she repeated. "He lifted a building with his bare hands, and you say he has no special abilities?" "That is what the file says," Thrix admitted, "though I suspect the file will need to be updated." The medics managed to stabilize Marcus enough to transport him to the station's intensive care unit, where more advanced equipment could continue the work of keeping him alive. The prognosis was uncertain at best, with the human doctors speaking in grave tones about the extent of the damage and the long road to recovery that lay ahead if he survived at all. But something strange happened in the hours that followed. The Aleth younglings, all 12 of them, refused to leave the medical wing. They sat in the waiting area outside the intensive care unit, their small bodies huddled together for comfort, their bioluminescence pulsing in synchronized rhythms, as if they were all thinking the same thought. Sorvith tried to convince them to return to their quarters and rest, but they would not go. "We have to stay," Vela said, with a stubbornness that surprised her teacher. "The giant might wake up, and he might be scared. And we need to be here to tell him that everyone is okay." The other younglings nodded their agreement, their lights pulsing in patterns of determination that Sorvith had never seen in children. So young, she realized then that something had changed in her students, something profound that went beyond simple gratitude for being rescued. They had witnessed a miracle, and that miracle had touched something deep inside them. Sorvith contacted the Aleth homeworld to report what had happened, and within hours, the story had spread across the entire planet. The Aleth were not a warlike species, and they did not have heroes in the way that other species did. Their culture valued harmony and community and gentle cooperation, not individual acts of spectacular courage, but the image of a lone human lifting the wreckage of a collapsed building to save 12 of their children. Struck something primal in the Aleth collective consciousness within a day. Marcus Cole's name was known on a planet he had never visited, spoken by beings he had never met, honored by a species whose children he had saved without any thought of reward. And in the intensive care unit of the Lorix mining station, the human who had done the impossible remained unconscious, his body fighting a desperate battle for survival, while the galaxy slowly began to learn his name. Marcus Cole woke up 3 weeks later in a medical facility he did not recognize, surrounded by equipment that hummed with quiet efficiency and soft blue lights that pulsed in gentle rhythms. tried to move and found that his body responded sluggishly. As if his muscles had forgotten how to work, a face appeared above him. An Aleph medical specialist whose bioluminescence brightened with relief and joy when she saw his eyes open. "You are awake," she said in her musical voice. "We were beginning to worry that you might sleep forever." Marcus tried to speak, but his throat was dry and his voice came out as a rough croak. Medical specialist gave him water and helped him sit up slowly, carefully, as if he were made of glass that might shatter at any moment. As consciousness returned fully, he began to remember what had happened: the collapse, the children, the beam, the lifting, and then nothing but darkness and dreams. "The kids," he managed to say, his voice barely a whisper. "The Aleph kids, are they okay?" The medical specialist smiled at him with an expression of pure warmth. "They are more than okay," she said. "All 12 of them are healthy and safe. And they have been asking about you every single day since you saved them." Marcus closed his eyes and felt something loosen in his chest. A tension he had not known he was carrying. They were safe. He had not been too late this time. The following weeks were a blur of treatments, surgeries, and rehabilitation that pushed the boundaries of Galactic Union medical science. The Aleph homeworld had sent their best physicians to assist with Marcus's recovery, and they had brought technologies that human medicine had never seen. His shattered spine was reinforced with a synthetic lattice that integrated with his natural bone, making it stronger than it had ever been before. His torn muscles were regrown using cellular regeneration, techniques that accelerated healing by a factor of 10. The damage to his eyes was repaired so thoroughly that his vision actually improved beyond what it had been before the accident. When he was finally able to walk again, slowly and with assistance, he found a delegation waiting for him in the recovery wing. Representatives from the Aleph homeworld had come to offer him formal thanks on behalf of their entire species. They brought gifts of rare crystals and woven fabrics, traditional tokens of honor that the Aleph reserved for their greatest heroes. They offered him citizenship on their world, a home among their peaceful communities, and wealth enough to live in comfort for the rest of his days. Marcus listened to their offers with quiet patience, and then he declined them all. "I did not do it for rewards," he said simply. "I did it because children were going to die, and I could not let that happen." The Aleph delegates did not seem surprised by his refusal, as if they had somehow expected it. Their leader, an elder whose bioluminescence shone with deep wisdom, stepped forward and placed a small object in Marcus's hand. It was a crystal pendant carved in the shape of a human figure with arms raised, holding up a stylized beam. "This is for you," the elder said. "It was made by the younglings you saved, working together over many days to create something that would remind you of what you did. We call it the symbol of the lifter," she continued, "and it will be taught in our schools for generations to come, so that our children will know that there are beings in the galaxy who will break themselves to keep others whole." Marcus looked at the small pendant and felt tears sting his eyes. For the first time in years, he thought of Elena, of the rescue that had come too late, of all the empty years he had spent running from a grief he could not escape, and he realized that something had changed inside him, something that the lifting of that beam had set free. He had spent 7 years believing that he had failed his daughter by not being there when she needed him, but perhaps the truth was different. Perhaps Elena had needed him to survive, to keep going, to be in that medical bay at that exact moment when 12 other children needed a miracle. Perhaps everything that had happened, all the pain and the loss and the wandering, had been leading him to that single point in time when his broken heart could do something that no one else in the galaxy could do. The thought did not erase his grief, but it transformed it into something he could carry without being crushed. Marcus left the medical facility and returned to work on another station, another asteroid, another forgotten corner of space where freight needed to be hauled and cargo needed to be loaded. He did not seek fame or attention, and he politely refused the many interview requests that came from media outlets across the Galactic Union. But the story spread anyway, as stories always do when they touch something true in the hearts of those who hear them in Vescari tactical academies. Instructors began teaching a new module called Human Psychological Override that analyzed what Marcus Cole had done and explored its implications for combat and rescue operations. Mathematically minded Vescari struggled to incorporate the concept into their models, eventually settling on a variable they called the determination factor that attempted to quantify human willpower in the dominion of Kreth, a militaristic empire that had been quietly planning expansion into human-occupied territories. Strategic planners revised their invasion scenarios after careful study of the incident. Calculations now included a warning that humans under sufficient emotional stress could perform physical feats that normal combat projections did not account for, and that any invasion force should expect significant casualties from irrational resistance. The invasion plans were quietly shelved, and on the Aleth homeworld, in a small school where 12 younglings had returned to their normal lives, a new word was added to the curriculum. The word was hero, borrowed from the human language because the Aleth had no equivalent in their own tongue. The teacher who taught the lesson was Sorvith, who had been there in the medical bay when the human lifted the sky. She told her students that a hero was someone who broke themselves so that others could remain whole, someone who looked at the impossible and decided to do it anyway because the alternative was unacceptable. The younglings listened with their lights pulsing in patterns of fascination and wonder. And when the lesson was done, they went home and told their families what they had learned. Commander Thrix, who had retired from active duty after the incident, kept a single image displayed on his personal console. It showed a human in a dusty jumpsuit, arms raised, holding up a massive beam while light shone through the gap beneath it. Beneath the image, he had written a note in his native language. When they calculate the impossible, the note read, "Do not interfere, for they are not calculating whether they can. They are calculating whether they must." And somewhere on a distant station, Marcus Cole finished his shift, ate a simple meal, and went to sleep wearing a small crystal pendant around his neck. He dreamed of his daughter, as he always did, but this time she was smiling at him with pride in her eyes. "You saved them, Daddy," she said in the dream. "You saved them all." And for the first time in 7 years, Marcus Cole slept without nightmares.